Computer. Yep. Okay, so um, today we are going to talk about citric acid cycle, and this is a very important um, part of metabolism that you are going to learn in today's class and the next class, which is citric acid cycle. And if you look here, I'm showing you a time lapse image of a Ferris wheel, okay, at at night, and you can see that it's actually rotating quite rapidly. You can it's all looking blurred, but it basically runs in a cycle, right? And so the reason I want to show you this is that somebody has their mute. Somebody has to mute themselves. Please make sure you are muted. Okay, I'm hearing some noise. So this is Ferris wheel that you are seeing at night, which is running in a cycle. Mimics what aerobic cells do. Okay, aerobic cells also use a metabolic wheel like the one that is shown here, and that wheel, metabolic wheel, is what we know as TCA cycle, tricarboxylic acid cycle, also known as Krebs cycle. Okay, and Krebs cycle is was discovered by a German-born British scientist, whose name was Hans Krebs. Okay, and Hans, was really a prolific researcher, and he made some really important discoveries in metabolism. And so he was responsible for not only discovering citric acid cycle, but he also actually did a lot of work on urea cycle, which we will talk about when we talk about amino acid metabolism. And he was also responsible for generating some key research on glyoxylate cycle that hopefully we'll talk when we talk about fatty acid metabolism. Okay. And because he contributed so much to our understanding of human metabolism, he was awarded a Nobel Prize in 1953. Okay. So it is a very important cycle. It is actually the central hub of the metabolism, which basically means that several pathways converge on this very important metabolic pathway, citric acid cycle. Now, if you recall, I think I told you earlier that if you were to take a mole of glucose, right, and you had to simply oxidize every carbon of that glucose molecule into carbon dioxide and water. So complete oxidation of glucose in one step to let's say carbon dioxide and water, right? You would produce about its standard free energy is minus 2,840 kilojoule per mole. Okay, that much energy is there in that reaction. Glucose being oxidized oxidatively, right, plus oxygen going to CO2 and water. But you already know that nature is using pathways and several steps to catalyze the oxidation of glucose. It simply doesn't burn it like using molecular oxygen. It actually takes the glucose through glycolysis, generates pyruvate, extracts some energy, right, in the form of ATP and those reducing equivalents, electron carriers, right? But then also pyruvate has further fate. We talked about that in the last class, right? Depending on whether oxygen is present and oxygen is not present. And so how is pyruvate oxidized under aerobic conditions is what we are going to talk, okay, in today's class and the next lecture. So obviously we are going to discuss the chemical logic of the TCA cycle, and I will talk about that briefly. And so you will learn how pyruvate is, before we enter Krebs cycle, TCA cycle, you know, TCA cycle starts from acetyl coenzyme A. That's the molecule we need, right? But you know that pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A, there is another step, another enzyme involved. Remember pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, PDH complex I was referring to? Yeah, pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, which exists in mitochondria, mitochondrial matrix, that enzyme actually takes pyruvate and converts it to acetyl coenzyme A. That reaction, if you remember, is completely irreversible even under cellular conditions. Very, very high delta G negative. And so, but once you have acetyl coenzyme A, then yes, then it can actually join the citric acid cycle. So yeah, so we'll briefly talk about how pyruvate is oxidatively decarboxylated to acetyl coenzyme A using PDH complex. Okay. And then when you actually do oxidize acetyl coenzyme A, how you produce carbon dioxide, what happens to some of the intermediates, one, for example, oxaloacetate, it gets regenerated. When you say oxaloacetate is regenerated, means that you can turn that citric acid cycle to infinite turn. Typically, even 5 molecules of oxaloacetate could be enough to oxidize tons of molecules of acetyl coenzyme A, because it gets reproduced at the turn of each cycle. You'll see that. And so we'll also talk about what are the energetic consequences of the cycle, what are the intermediates, can you use those intermediates for the biosynthesis of a new micromolecule? And answer is yes. And we'll briefly talk about in that regard what are anaplerotic reaction. And then finally, how TCA cycle gets regulated. Cool. Okay, so catabolism of amino acid, fatty acid, and sugars, they all follow these 3 stages. Okay, and that's what is shown here. And you should have a very good understanding of this. This is very, very important slide, but it gives you a very complete picture of how individual types of fuel in your cells and your body are metabolized and what happens to them. Okay, and so in stage 1, you can see on the top, they are basically showing you amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose. And you can see that when they're oxidizing, they're actually removing electrons from them, right? And those electrons, where will they end up? They will end up to those electron carriers, right? Remember, NAD+, FAD, FMN, and so on. And you break down, eventually those molecules also result in acetyl coenzyme A. Okay, not all amino acids, but some will end up in the form of acetyl coenzyme A. Once you have acetyl coenzyme A, but they're showing you, if you look here in terms of glucose, they're showing you glucose undergoes through glycolysis, make pyruvate, and then pyruvate comes into the mitochondrial matrix, and you basically have pyruvate dehydrogenase complex will oxidatively decarboxylate pyruvate to generate acetyl coenzyme A, a molecule of CO2. Okay, pyruvate, if you wrote the structure, which you should have done, you will notice that it's like 3 carbon molecule, right? So you lose a carbon and then you make 2 carbon activated ester, thioester of acetate, basically. What is acetyl coenzyme A? It's an activated thioester of acetate, right? That's what it is. You know that. I will show you the structure. Just for completion's sake, I will show you several of those structures again. But anyway, then you take acetyl coenzyme A and you basically run it through citric acid cycle, and we'll talk about that today, the middle portion. And in that process also you generate 2 moles of carbon dioxides. So you bring 2 carbon molecule in, you exit 2 carbon molecule out in the form of carbon dioxides. And then in that process, you extract more energy. So if you are seeing these red arrows, they literally mean that those are energetic pathways. You are extracting energy from those molecules in the form of electrons. How? Again, those electrons will go to stage 3. In the stage 3, those electron carriers, especially in their reduced form, such as NADH and FADH2, they will go on to those respiratory chains. Remember, complex 1 through complex 4. We'll talk about that in chapter 19. Those electrons eventually end up in those respiratory chains, and those respiratory chains will actually transfer electrons to molecular oxygen eventually to generate water. But in that process, they will also generate proton gradient, and then that proton gradient is utilized to make ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. Okay, using F0, F1, ATP synthase. Already we talked about that complex, very fascinating molecular machine before in the class, right? So this is overall view of your things right here. You can spend 5 minutes just staring at this slide and closing your eyes and thinking about how overall the metabolism is working here. Not a complete picture, but pretty central figure. Okay. So it's actually, as I said, Hans Krebs was the first one to show that oxidation of acetate is accomplished by a cycle. Okay, it goes into a cycle, not like how glycolysis happens from top to bottom. And one thing I want to warn you, and you will see that maybe in your exams or in your other exams, MCAT, etc. Sometimes when people are talking about acetyl coenzyme A, they will refer acetyl coenzyme A loosely to acetate. They will just say, oh, you know how acetate gets metabolized in citric acid cycle. And you can just tell yourself that they are likely talking about acetyl coenzyme A. Okay, so it's a little bit loosely termed, and that's why I have this slide. It says that oxidation of acetate is accomplished by a cycle. Actually, you make acetyl coenzyme A, not acetate, right? So, but that's what they mean. And so from pyruvate, basically, you'll take pyruvate and you'll oxidatively decarboxylate by PDH complex to generate acetyl coenzyme A. They're writing here acetate. I just want to alert you, okay? But it's biochemists can use this term. That's what I want to. And then acetate or acetyl coenzyme A, if you're formally speaking, is degraded into carbon dioxide and you produce ATP. But not a lot, you will see that. But you also produce a lot of reducing equivalents. Remember, 1 molecule of NADH, 2 molecules of FADH2. And then basically this NADH and FADH2, a total of 3 of these will go on to make more ATP in the electron transport chain. Okay. So again, how does that happen? It's shown here. Oxidation of glucose, you take glucose and convert it all the way to carbon dioxide and water, right? It's a 24 electron oxidation process. 24 electrons you are stripping away from glucose molecule to generate CO2 and water. So it happens in these steps. Glucose to pyruvate by glycolysis, pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A, pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. Acetyl CoA will join citric acid cycle. There are 8 reactions that we will talk at length in today's class. And those 8 reactions actually produce, you can see 2 molecules of NADH, 3 molecules of NADH and 1 molecule of FADH2. Okay, I think I misspoke in the previous slide, but you can see here 3 molecules of NADH and 1 molecule of FADH2. These reducing electron carriers, 4 of them, lots of energy in them. Okay, And then in that process, you are generating GTP, one high energy molecule in the citric acid cycle. So during entire citric acid cycle, you are only making one molecule of GTP or ATP, depending on what isoform of the enzyme you're using. But as I said, these are all energy rich molecules, these NADH and FADH2s. Okay, so they will go on to the inner membrane of the mitochondria, and basically they will transfer those electrons to those electron acceptors, respiratory chains, complex 1 through 4. And in that process, they actually create a proton gradient in the intermembrane space, the space that is there in the mitochondrial inner membrane and the mitochondrial outer membrane, okay, the space between them. The proton gradient is created. Think about how cool this is. Those protons don't leak out from the outer mitochondrial membrane into the cytoplasm. No, they don't. They stay there. Once these complexes pump protons into the intermembrane space, they actually stick there, stick around there. Okay, and only come through F0 F1 ATPase synthase in the oxidative phosphorylation step. That proton gradient is type of a charged cell, charged battery. Okay, that proton gradient will move downhill through F0 F1 ATP synthase, and that energy is utilized to make ATP molecule from ADP and inorganic phosphate. Okay, so that's how the whole process works. You have a more visual feel for the whole thing now, right? Pretty cool, right? All right. So how is pyruvate first gets converted to acetyl coenzyme A by PDH? It turns out that a PDH complex is a very, very fascinating enzyme complex. Okay, it's a non-covalent assembly of 3 enzymes. Okay, 3 enzymes means each enzyme has a unique catalytic activity, okay, or activities in some case. So 3 enzymes means at least 3 types of catalytic activities. Okay, maybe one enzyme has more than one. And each of the enzymes have multiple copies. And for this beautiful, beautiful multi-peptide complex enzymes to work, you actually need 5 coenzymes. And you have seen many of these coenzymes, but there are at least a couple of them are new, which I will spend some time again going over. So pyruvate to acetyl-CoA conversion happens in pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, PDH complex. Okay. And again, as I said, PDH complex is typically located in the mitochondria of eukaryotic cells. If it's bacterial species, there is no mitochondria, so they exist in the cytosol. But we are mostly going to talk about mammalian metabolism, okay, unless we have to do something unique about it. So the 5 coenzymes that participate in this reaction, and there is another enzyme we will talk about, that enzyme also utilizes these identical 5 coenzymes that participate in this reaction. Okay, the reaction itself, what is the reaction? Reaction is conversion of pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A. So you will see here, this is pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule. And you are basically doing oxidative decarboxylation reaction where you are removing a molecule of carbon dioxide. So 1 carbon has gone as a carbon dioxide, and then the 2 carbon is now in the form of acetate, or more formally speaking, activated acetate, or more formally speaking, acetyl coenzyme A, right? That molecule is how we show it here, right? And you can see that standard free energy for this reaction is highly negative, minus 33 kilojoule per mole. And in fact, even actual free energy, delta G, actual in the cell, if you consider all the metabolites, is also highly negative. That's why this complex is catalyzes the reaction irreversibly, even under cellular conditions. This is one reason why you cannot take acetyl coenzyme A and actually generate pyruvate. Because if you were able to do that, and if we are able to do that, mammals are able to do that, then we can take fat and make glucose from it, right? Because you know that pyruvate is an intermediate for gluconeogenesis reaction. But this reaction is totally irreversible, only going in the direction from left to right. It never goes from right to left. Cool, right? All right. So, so the 5 coenzymes that are needed are coenzyme A, because you can see coenzyme A is needed because you need to make acetyl coenzyme A. So yeah, okay, that you can make sense. You also need NAD plus. Okay, and you need TPP. TPP is a new coenzyme that you have not seen, thiamine pyrophosphate. I'll show you how it is produced. And then the second one is lipoate that you don't know and you have not heard so far, I believe. Lipoate or lipoic acid. So TPP and lipoate are new coenzymes that we'll discuss. And of course, you also need FAD. Okay. So FAD, lipoic acid, TPP, thiamine pyrophosphate, NAD plus, and coenzyme A. Those are the 5 you need. And you can see that you produce NADH, CO2, and acetyl coenzyme A. Cool, right? So in terms of how do you make TPP, it turns out that our cells have an enzyme called thiamine pyrophosphate synthetase. Remember, I have always tried to tell you that if you use the word synthetase, those enzymes will typically utilize ATP as one of their substrates. If it is synthase, then they do not need ATP for doing their synthesis. Okay, so that's the difference between synthase and synthetases. Easily you can identify. So how do you make thiamine pyrophosphate? The one, that molecule that is shown on the right hand side. Thiamine pyrophosphate is made from vitamin B1 and thiamine right here, the structure that is shown here on the left hand side. You take thiamine, and I do not want to ask you to memorize the entire structure of thiamine or vitamin B1. I will never do that. But I will definitely want you to know the business end of the molecule, which is shown here in this color, okay, which is this thiazole ring with a proton on it, on the nitrogen. And you can just say R group on the left, and then you can put R group there. You know, that's good enough for you to know. But beauty of this reaction you will see in a minute, okay? Why you need this very fascinating molecule, thiazole. It turns out, but anyway, first you make thiamine pyrophosphate using thiamine and ATP, and simply thiamine pyrophosphate you will be able to make. You can see a reaction seems very straightforward. Use thiamine hydroxyl group and basically use ATP, and ATP attacks, and you basically make pyrophosphate, right? And AMP leaves. So in this case, the attack will be on the beta phosphoryl group, right? I want you to draw that and figure that out yourself. It turns out that thiamine pyrophosphate basically is needed for the decarboxylation of alpha keto acid. Okay, and in our case, what is the alpha keto acid? If you think about this chemical structure, it's pyruvate, right? Pyruvate is an alpha keto acid. Okay, and but one thing I wanted, I know many of you don't like so much organic chemistry, but some of you do love organic chemistry. I know that from my experiences. So I just wanted to throw this. Remember, this is a homework. Why thiamine pyrophosphate proton is acidic, right? And it may seem like a surprise to you if you look at the structure, why this proton is acidic. When a proton is acidic, what happens? Basically, you can pick it up using a weak base, right? So if you pick it up using a weak base, what will you generate on this thiazole ring? You will generate a carbon ion and that carbon, right? And if that carbon ion is stable and happy, then that carbon ion will form. If that carbon ion is very unstable, unhappy, therefore it will never form, right? And therefore that proton will not be acidic. But experiments show that this proton is very acidic. Okay. So why? Because remember, if you generate that carbon ion, there is nowhere you can formally take that carbon ion and push it to delocalize it, right? Nowhere. It will just sit there. It will never delocalize. And therefore, you might think that that's not a very stable carbon ion, right? There is no resonance hybrid I can write, structure I can write for this. So that must mean that that proton is not acidic, will not leave very easily. But turns out this is an acidic proton. Experiments prove it. And the stability lies, has two reasons. One is because once you develop the carbon ion there, the sulfur atom, the neighboring sulfur atom has empty d orbitals, okay, where that negative charge can partially go and delocalize. You can push it arrow formally, but that's what happens. That's one reason why that carbon ion is stable. The other reason is that if you do that carbon ion, you can see that it becomes an ylide-like structure. Ylide, if you remember YLIDE, ylide-like structures, you must have seen that in your ergo class. Ylide-like structure where there is a positive charge on one atom and there is a negative charge on the adjacent atom. And ylides, are relatively stable intermediates. You can make them. And so those are the two reasons why that proton is very acidic. Anyway, I know I'm digressing a little bit, but I thought I will just quickly remind you. This is once you produce thymine pyrophosphate. What about NAD plus? Of course, NAD plus or NADP plus, you already know what the structure looks like. The business end of the molecule is shown here in the pink. The rest of the molecule is important in enzyme recognition, binding, etc. But business end where chemistry happens is right here in the ring, right? Nicotinamide ring. Nicotinamide ring here, as shown, is in the oxidized form. It can accept electron in the form of a hydride. So if you do 2 electron reduction, you basically will be able to add hydride and you will be able to generate this reduced form of nicotinamide. But I have already shown you this. This hydride can come from the top form or from the bottom, right? So that's the structure is known as Pro-R or Pro-S. Why Pro-R and Pro-S? Look, this is not an asymmetric center if you look at, because two groups are the same. Both are hydrogens. But when they bind to a chiral enzyme, then they are distinguishable. Okay, that's why they are called Pro-R and Pro-S. So you can generate either, you can add the hydride from the top or from the bottom. And that's how you generate. If you remember, we talked about this in the previous classes. This one is FAD or FMN. And you know that business end of the molecule is shown here on the top, isoalloxazine ring. And the remaining part of the molecules are for, again, recognitions and bindings. FMN structure is shown here. Flamine mononucleotide is just here in the pink. That structure alone is FMN. If you actually extend the structure all the way to the bottom here in the top figure, including this purple part, then it is flavin adenine dinucleotide, FAD molecule, right? But the business end of the molecule is isoalloxazine ring. Remember, the molecule that I showed you here can only do 2 electron transfer. Okay, 2 electron redox reaction is all it can do, both NAD plus and NADP plus. It cannot do 1 electron transfer. Okay, but these FAD and FMN molecules are amazing. They can actually do both 1 electron redox reaction as well as 2 electron redox reactions, depending on the need. Okay, so as a result, they can exist in any of the 3 oxidized redox states here, and shown here in the bottom: yellow, blue, and the one here shown on the top right. Okay, and so because they can exist in these 3 forms, they are able to participate in both 1 electron and 2 electron transfer reactions. Okay, and they're widely utilized in metabolic reactions. So just let's look at the isoalloxazine ring chemistry. See, they forgot about everything else. They're just showing you the business end of the molecule. So if the molecule is in fully oxidized form, it exists as the structure here in the bottom, yellow, right? This is a yellow molecule. It absorbs at 450 nanometer lambda max. And then when you do one electron reduction, okay, so that's what they're showing you, proton plus an electron. So that is one electron reduction reaction, right? You will see that you are able to generate this a radical species called semiquinone. You have seen this quinone and semiquinone form, right, in your organic classes. And those semiquinone is where it has accepted one electron. So that's why they are showing you FADH or FMNH. Okay. So this molecule is very different. It absorbs at like 570 nanometer, and it's blue in color. Okay. So if you are following an enzymatic reaction where FAD is actually participating in one electron reduction, you can clearly monitor the rate of the reaction by just following the formation of FADH at the 570 nanometer, right? And then you can also accept one more electron and one more proton. So that will be a total of 2 electron reduction, right? And so that would be here, then you will generate FADH2 or FMNH2. And that is the fully reduced form of FAD or FMN. Okay. So you can see how, and this molecule, when it's fully reduced, two electron reduction, is totally colorless. So you can again monitor the reaction by just following a loss of yellow color or loss of blue color, right? So this is just to give you an idea how you can do experiments, right? If you are doing your reaction under basic conditions, let's say pH around 9 or so, then you lose that proton on the nitrogen here in FADH or FMNH. And once you lose that, that becomes nitrogen with a negative charge on it. That is different color again. So you can monitor that reaction also. Yeah, so these are the ways you can actually monitor the reactions. This is a little introduction to you to FAD and FMN biochemistry. Coenzyme A is very, very simple, right? You already have seen the structure of coenzyme A. You see pantothenic acid, that hydroxyl group of the pantothenic acid, one end of it is attached to a modified adenine nucleotide, right? And that modification is at the 3'. You have a phosphoryl group at the 3' hydroxyl group of the sugar. And then, of course, you are seeing the business end of the molecule right here in the pink extreme left. That's all they show you when they show you the structure of acetyl coenzyme A, right? Activated form of acetate. But you know what that molecule looked like, right? This is the structure of acetyl coenzyme A. All right. Yeah, I know we have seen these molecules again and again, but it's good to actually just go through them one more time. Now, this is a pretty cool one, right? This you have not seen, lipoate or lipoic acid. Lipoic acid is the coenzyme that actually exists in alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase as well as pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. You see lipoic acid structure is shown here in the oxidized form, right? It's an acid, you can see on one carbon and terminal carbon is a carboxylic acid, right? And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon. Fifth carbon is part of a 5-membered ring with a disulfide bridge. That's the lipoic acid in the oxidized form. In the reduced form, dihydrolipoic acid, because you see it's reduced, you'll have proton on those thiols, right? Dihydrolipoic acid, which is reduced form, is shown here in the structure B. So this is the reduced form of the enzyme. But how does this coenzyme found? How does this coenzyme work in the context of the catalysis, pyruvate, the oxidative decarboxylation reaction of pyruvate? It turns out that lipoic acid is actually covalently attached to one of the lysines of the enzyme. Okay, so lysine side chain, if you remember, has the primary amine, right? And so primary amine actually forms this amide group, amide bond with the lipoic acid. And you can now see that, and I think this was, I alluded to this before, and I showed you this before in one of the earlier classes. This kind of structure provides a lot of flexibility. You see how many methylene bridges you see, because these every carbon-carbon bond can rotate freely. This kind of structure allows this group to move between the two different enzymes, the flexibility. Okay, so it's pretty cool how this thing works. I will show you the structure. It is mind-boggling how pyruvate dehydrogenase complex works, and works in no time, like literally fast. But you want to know the basic chemistry behind this, right? Okay, so what is the reaction overall of pyruvate dehydrogenase complex? Remember, I told you that there are three different enzymatic reactions, three different enzymes, E1, E2, and E3. Those are shown here at the bottom. First enzyme activity is pyruvate dehydrogenase activity. Okay. The second activity is dihydrolipoyl transacetylase. Okay. Basically, you are transferring acetyl group, and show you the reaction. And that enzyme does two things. Okay, that enzyme actually does that transacetylation reaction. And then what happens is another enzyme, third enzyme, which is dihydrolipoyl dehydrogenase, will do a unique reaction where it will basically oxidize the reduced disulfide using FAD. Okay, so three enzymatic activities here. Let's talk about that. Remember thiamine pyrophosphate? What was when I was referring to that? What I was telling you? I was telling you that thiamine pyrophosphate can exist as a stable carbanion, right? Remember that proton was acidic. So although the reaction of thiamine pyrophosphate in the E1 enzyme, pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme, is a little more complicated than what I'm going to show you or tell you rather. But if you want to memorize this reaction, it's an easy way to memorize it. Okay, that's what. It doesn't happen quite the way I will tell you. But essentially what's happening is you are taking TPP and pyruvate, you see here on the left-hand side. And in the first reaction, you basically are forming this intermediate called hydroxyethylthiamine pyrophosphate, or HETPP. And how will you do that reaction? Think about it. 3-carbon molecule pyruvate, and it decarboxylates you with TPP reaction. Okay. So as I said, actual reaction is a little complicated, and I used to do the mechanism of that reaction, but I stopped because it gives you headache. Okay, most students. And when you go to higher level classes, you can actually look at it, or if you really are curious, you can look it up. And if you send me an email, I will actually immediately share a slide with you. And there might be a slide at the end of this, at the end, what will we cover? I may have already given you a slide. But anyway, you negative charge that carbanion can attack that carbonyl, and then when it will attack, you can form this, you can double bond can get pushed, and you can make this alcohol molecule, right? And you are getting rid of this carboxylate. Quite frankly, the reaction doesn't happen this way, but I'm just trying to tell you so you can memorize it. So TPP has formed a covalent bond with pyruvate molecule, where pyruvate molecule has lost a carbon to carbon dioxide. Cool. So then what happens in the second reaction, you take hydroxyethylthiamine pyrophosphate, and you take, it basically gets shuttled to the second enzyme active site. Okay, that's what is happening. This molecule goes near the active site of the E2 enzyme, dihydrolipoyl transacetylase. What will happen there? starting reaction in the second enzyme is that an oxidized form of lipoic acid, lipoate, in the cyclic form, right, will basically accept the acetyl group from hydroxyethylthymine pyrophosphate intermediate. And so you can see here that now you have acetyl group on top of one of the sulfur atom, right? So it's kind of, again, an activated thioester. That's what the enzyme is doing. It's basically saying, hello, come, and you form this highly reactive, like acetyl coenzyme A intermediate. Like, it's the same chemistry. It's still a thioester. That's what you're forming. But it turns out that as soon as you form this thioester of acetyl coenzyme A, which basically means once you have formed this acetyl dihydrolipoate, right, shown here, a coenzyme A molecule, just coenzyme A molecule, will sneak in, and that will use its thiol group to attack that carbonyl and form acetyl coenzyme A. Okay. And you form this acetyl coenzyme A. Remember, what is the reaction here? Overall reaction, if you remember from my previous slide, is you take a 3-carbon pyruvate molecule and you get rid of one atom of carbon as carbon dioxide, and you take acetyl coenzyme A, you take acetate and you activate it to generate acetyl coenzyme A, and that's the reaction. So everything is done here. You have already formed acetyl coenzyme A and you are able to decarboxylate carbon dioxide, right? So that would be the third reaction you already did. So you did one reaction, two reaction, transferring of acetyl group from hydroxyethylthymine pyrophosphate to lipoic acid to generate acetyl dihydrolipoate. And then you take that and react with coenzyme A to generate acetyl coenzyme A. And now you have generated this dihydrolipoic acid, right? Dihydrolipoate. And so in the fourth reaction, which is catalyzed by dihydrolipoyl dehydrogenase, look at the enzyme name, right? Very easy to remember. Basically take dihydrolipoyl coenzyme and you oxidize it. Why do you want to oxidize it? Oh, because you want to keep doing this reaction. It should be a catalytic reaction, right? It's a catalyst. PDH is a catalyst. So yeah, you need to regenerate the oxidized form of lipoic acid so you can take on another molecule of hydroxyethylthymine pyrophosphate, right? So yeah, so the fourth enzyme will do that. It will take FAD molecule and then it will oxidize that to lipoic acid in the oxidized form, right? And then what will you do then? FAD will get converted to, think about it, FAD will oxidize this dihydrolipoic acid. It will get reduced, right, to FADH2. But you want to have FAD present. So you must recycle FADH2 that you generated. How does that happen? It happens via NAD+. NAD+ will go and actually oxidize FADH2 back to FAD. So the fourth step of this reaction continues. And so that's what is shown here. The students often get confused in the fourth step. Okay, so remember, it's the FAD that oxidizes dihydrolipoate. And NAD+ then oxidizes reduced FAD, which will be FADH2, back to FAD. And that's how the cycle runs. Cool, right? Now, yeah, unless I show you the structure, you will not be able to appreciate. This is actual structure of PDH complex. This is not a complete structure as you are looking at. Actually, it's a slice from, top form has been sliced away. It's a very, very complicated structure. So scientists really struggled to get a complete picture of how this complex worked. Hundreds of scientists worked on it to figure out. Everybody focused on one part of the molecule and they brought together whatever they learned to actually make this structure that you are seeing here. So you can see I'm showing you enzyme E1, multiple copies of enzyme E1, right? E1 is this pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme, first one. Then you see E2 shown in the green. It's a trimer, you can already see, right? And then nestling to E2 is this E3 enzymes, right? And so the reason E2 is sandwiched between E3 and E1 is why? Because it has to actually swing back and forth. Look at the reaction in the back. It has to go and accept hydroxyethylthymine pyrophase phosphate from E1, and then once it has done the reaction, it has go to the fourth enzyme, fourth reaction, which is catalyzed by the E3 enzyme, dihydrolipoyl dehydrogenase. So it has to have a nice swinging arm, and that's what this lipoic acid swinging arm does. And you can kind of see that swinging arm here in the blue, light blue. There is electron density they are showing you. So E2 is constantly talking to E1 as well as E3 enzyme. That's why it's in the middle. Pretty cool, right? How this whole thing works. It's beautiful, beautiful. Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's get back to our citric acid cycle. We have to go a little bit faster than we are doing, but let's see. You will see that I'll be repeating a bunch of reactions, so but we'll try to do our best in the time we have. Okay, so it turns out that living systems, they didn't just take pyruvate and boom, use oxygen to completely oxidize it, to carbon dioxide and water. No, they did they evolved with a very clever chemistry and did the oxidation reactions in several steps. And there are many advantages of that, because you can take the intermediates of a metabolic pathway and maybe utilize it to make something new, a macromolecule, a protein, new DNA, new RNA. And you try to extract, by doing these stepwise steps, you actually are maximizing your control on regulation, number one, right? And you are maximizing the output. Okay, so the way pyruvate gets or acetyl coenzyme A gets oxidized in citric acid cycle is that it takes acetate molecule in the first reaction and it condenses it to oxaloacetate, a 4-carbon molecule, same oxaloacetate that we talked about in gluconeogenesis. Okay, and then it does what we call beta cleavage, chemistry wise. Okay, and so it combines sequence of reactions where you actually oxidize the carbon to form carbon dioxide, right? You bring 2 molecules and you oxidize it to form 2 molecules of carbon dioxide, but then you regenerate this very important molecule, oxaloacetate, okay, when the cycle ends, and you capture the entire energy in the form of that 3 molecules of NADH and 1 molecule of FADH2 and a molecule of either ATP or GTP. Okay, that's what citric acid cycle does. So let's look at the reaction, right? Let's spend enough time on this slide so we actually understand the citric acid cycle really well. My advice to you is you must use this slide and draw your reactions on the pencil and paper. Don't stare at it. Okay, this is the essential reaction for your exam. Okay, you can answer tons of questions if you know this, these reactions. So let's look at the first reaction. First reaction is you bring the acetyl coenzyme A, 2-carbon activated molecule, and you condense it with 4 carbon molecule oxaloacetate. Very unique keto dicarboxylic acid, right? Oxaloacetate, right? You can see a ketone group and 2 carboxylic acid, 4 carbon. So 4 plus 2 carbon, when you do condensation reaction, will give you 6 carbon molecule, right? It's a condensation reaction catalyzed by citrate synthase. Citrate synthase works as a dimer. I will show you the structure of the enzyme. Very cool it is. Just so you know. But in that process, you generate this 6 carbon molecule, citrate. If you look at the structure of citrate and if you draw it, you will notice that this molecule has 3 carboxylic acid. Oh, that's why tricarboxylic acid cycle. Yeah, all right. So it's a 6 carbon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? With a hydroxyl group at the central carbon. But if you look at that central carbon here, it is a tertiary alcohol. And you know that tertiary alcohols are very hard to oxidize, right? So nature, what it did was it tried to convert a tertiary alcohol to a secondary alcohol. Okay, that molecule is shown here as isocitrate. So you take the citrate molecule, in the second step, you make it to isocitrate. Okay, but before you go, follow the 2 carbon that you are bringing into the cycle. Okay, 2 carbons are shown here in the pink. So just follow that all along. Okay, this is important for you. So you can see that you made a citrate molecule. They have only labeled one CH2 carboxylate in pink. Okay, and that's important because when citrate molecule binds to the next enzyme, one of the next enzymes, it actually binds in a very chiral fashion. It's a pro-chiral molecule. We'll come back to that. And you can already see why I'm saying that, because you can see on the central carbon, 2 groups are same, but maybe when they bind to a chiral enzymes, they will act differently. Okay. I hope I will be able to spend a little more time, 1 more minute on that. Anyway, so once you generated the citrate, the second reaction happens in 2 steps, 2A and 2B, and catalyzed by this enzyme aconitase. It's an iron sulfur enzyme. You don't have to worry about the mechanism of this. It's a little complicated. But you take the citrate molecule and what you do is you dehydrate it. So you basically remove the hydroxyl group in form of water. And when you dehydrate, and you'll see this kind of reactions later on, you'll form a double bond. Okay. You make cis aconitate. Cis aconitate will be a molecule where you will have both carboxylate group on one side. Then the enzyme aconitase will add water molecule. Okay. But this time it will add water molecule at a different carbon. Not the same carbon. If it adds the water molecule to the same carbon, then it will go back to citrate. But it wants to add the carbon that is the next to that central carbon I was showing you. And that's when you generate this isocitrate molecule right here, shown in 3. So very cool, right? Think about it. Why it's doing that? It's dehydrating and then hydrating it. This aconitase, that's all it's doing. Why is it doing? Because it wants to move the hydroxyl group from that carbon to the neighboring carbon, so that now the molecule is a secondary alcohol that can be oxidized further. Very cool. Okay. You generated isocitrate. Cool. So next step, that will be number 3, is catalyzed by isocitrate dehydrogenase. Okay, it's an dehydrogenase reaction. That means it may be utilizing one of these reducing electron carriers in the oxidized form. Yes, it does. It utilizes NAD+. So you can see it's generating NAD+ with the red arrow. Red arrow means energy is conserved in that molecule NADH. But isocitrate dehydrogenase is again doing oxidative decarboxylation reaction, just like pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. So it is losing one carbon as a carbon dioxide. Where did you lose that carbon? Right here. You can see where the carbon is lost, right? This pink carbon you see labeled. Next to that pink carbon is the carbon which lost carbon as a carbon dioxide. So what did it do? Oxidation, right? Where is oxidation happening? In the next carbon right here, right? With the carbon that is next to the terminal carboxy group. So you can see that hydroxyl group has become a ketone, right? And then you have lost a carbon as a carbon dioxide in the neighboring carbon. That's why oxidative decarboxylation reaction. I am spending enough time in it mainly because I want to tell you how to understand these reactions and try to memorize them. You know, it becomes easier for you to memorize. So that's what oxidation is happening at the secondary alcohol to ketone, and then you are losing a carbon as carbon dioxide in the neighboring carbon. That molecule is a very, 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 very important intermediate, alpha ketoglutarate, also known as alpha Kg, alpha ketoglutarate. We'll talk about this molecule in amino acid metabolism. Alpha ketoglutarate then is taken up by another dehydrogenase enzyme called alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex. Okay, alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex is the enzyme that works in an identical fashion to pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. It uses identical 5 coenzymes that you saw in PDH complex. So alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex will actually take alpha ketoglutarate, one carbon it will remove as carbon dioxide, and then it will make an activated succinate molecule known as succinyl coenzyme A. Succinyl coenzyme A is a 4-carbon molecule which has an activated thioester. That's why succinyl coenzyme A. Okay? But notice one thing. The carbon that you brought into the cycle, citric acid cycle, are not the carbons that are lost, that are still there. In fact, the carbons that are lost are different carbons, as 2 carbon are lost here is carbon dioxide, right? Those are not the same carbon that entered as acetyl coenzyme A. So that's why there is a pink, they're tracking it nicely. Succinyl coenzyme A then is taken up by 5th enzyme, succinyl CoA synthetase. And this enzyme can, this reaction is a reversible reaction, right? So it can actually take ADP or GDP and take inorganic phosphate and make GTP or ATP. Whether you are making GTP or ATP will depend on what isoform of succinyl CoA synthetase you are using. Look at this. This is an example where synthetase is synthesizing GTP or ATP, right? The reverse reaction is what you saw in the previous I showed you. But it's a reversible reaction. So it depends what the concentration of, intermediates are. It can go either way. But once you make the GTP or ATP, that's high energy rich molecule. This reaction is a substrate level phosphorylation reaction, which means the enzymes are cytosolic and the intermediates are cytosolic. You will generate the molecule succinate in the 5th reaction, right? So 5th reaction is you take GDP, ADP, and succinyl coenzyme A, you generate succinate or GTP and ATP as product. Now they have stopped tracking that pink molecule, pink atoms, right? Because succinate, if you look at it, it is a very symmetrical molecule. They don't know which carbon because you can't. It's a totally symmetrical molecule. Carbon number 1 and 2 are identical to carbon number 3 and 4. So that's why they have stopped tracking it here. Next step of reaction, succinate to fumarate. This you will see many 3 enzymes catalyzing these reactions are very common actually. You will see them quite a lot. So you take succinate and you basically oxidize it further using FAD. So FAD, succinate dehydrogenase, will use FAD molecule and you'll generate FADH2. Again, energy is conserved there. And then you form a double bond between carbon and carbon, right? That molecule is fumarate. So that's a dehydrogenation reaction, right? You generate fumarate. Then you take fumarate and you stereoselectively hydrate it using the enzyme fumarase. Fumarase will add water molecule stereoselectively to one of the carbon in the double bond to generate what we call malate molecule. That molecule is L-malate. Okay, only one stereochemically pure form of malate is produced by fumarase, L-malate. They're not showing you here, but that's what happens. So fumarase will take fumarate and generate malate. Fumarase can also do the reverse reaction, malate to fumarate if needed. So that's why they are reversible arrows there. Once you have malate or L-malate, what we call it, malate dehydrogenase will catalyze final reaction utilizing NAD plus and generate oxaloacetate, regenerate oxaloacetate. Let's put it this way. It's again, you are basically taking this secondary alcohol and basically oxidizing it to ketone, and you have regenerated oxaloacetate. So the reaction number 1, reaction number 3, and reaction number 4 are the reactions that are totally irreversible under cellular conditions. Okay, irreversible reactions of citric acid cycle. So now, naturally, you know, these are the reactions that might be the site of regulations by allosteric means or phosphorylation means, right? So this is your citric acid cycle. You can go over again and again and again and again. But you can see that 2 molecules you bring in one turn, you oxidize those, you basically remove 2 carbon as carbon dioxide, not necessarily the same carbon that entered as acetyl coenzyme A. And eventually the 4 carbon molecule oxaloacetate that you are utilizing to carry out this important reaction where you are generating 3 NADH, 1 FADH2, 1 ATP or TATP GTP molecule, you can do this reaction again and again using oxaloacetate. Oxaloacetate is regenerated, and therefore it can carry out oxidation of, technically speaking, infinite number of acetyl coenzyme A molecules. Technically speaking, right? That's what regeneration means. Alpha ketoglutarate, how do you memorize the structure of alpha ketoglutarate? That's why I have written you glutaric acid structure. Look here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon dicarboxylic acid, right? 5 carbon acid. That's glutaric acid. So alpha ketoglutarate is also a 5 carbon molecule. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alpha keto, take 1 carboxylic acid and make a keto group. That's how you memorize the structure of alpha ketoglutarate. Enough. Okay, so if you look again under standard condition, you can see that, you know, those reactions 1, 3, and 4 are the ones that are actually most delta G negative under standard condition. And in cellular conditions, they are certainly a lot more delta G negative. And if you counted, I believe, under cellular conditions, the value of delta G will come out to be about minus 110 kilojoule per mole. Okay, overall reaction of the citric acid cycle. So, and if you recall, from glucose to pyruvate in glycolysis, if you remember, it was about minus 80 kilojoule per mole, right? Yeah, so that's something gives you an idea. So this table basically lists you individual reactions of the citric acid cycle on the left, the enzymes that catalyze those reactions, and their delta G value. And you can see several reactions are almost equilibrium reactions. Now let's look at them individually. Okay, it will not be as exciting, but let's look at them because we always do, right? So you take acetyl coenzyme A and oxaloacetate, and you basically do a condensation reaction using citrate synthase to generate citrate, which is a symmetrical molecule but does not react symmetrically. It reacts asymmetrically in enzyme active site because it is a prochiral molecule, because that central carbon on which hydroxyl group lies has two groups that are identical, but when they bind to chiral enzymes, they are distinguishable. They are different, and therefore that's how the reaction happens. So if you look at the actual structure of citrate synthase, you will notice that it's a nice dimer. It's a dimeric protein, dimeric enzyme, and people have done structural analysis of this enzyme. So they crystallize these enzymes in different forms. And one form they crystallized was that they took actually not acetyl coenzyme A, because if they took acetyl coenzyme A and oxaloacetate, immediately that molecule will make citrate, and citrate will not bind, and they will never be able to learn anything new. So to trick the enzyme that it still binds but doesn't do catalysis, they have actually utilized acetyl-CoA analog for their structural work. Okay, and I believe they may have used carboxymethyl CoA molecule for the structure. But anyway, they've shown that this is a very interesting enzyme. It has, it has a jaw that is open, and that jaw closes and creates the binding pocket for the second substrate. So what they were able to learn is that there is a flexible domain on each of the subunits shown here in green and yellow. It undergoes a large conformational change when it binds oxaloacetate, and it always binds oxaloacetate first. Okay, it will not bind both molecules. It will first bind oxaloacetate. This is how enzyme kinetics is. The data shows. And once oxaloacetate binds, the enzyme undergoes tremendous conformational change. And when it does undergo that conformational change, it actually creates a binding pocket for acetyl coenzyme A. Okay. So they are showing you in the left-hand side the open form of the enzyme alone when there are no ligands present. And on the right-hand side, they're showing you when the enzyme is bound to oxaloacetate and the acetyl-CoA analog. Cool, right? You can appreciate the conformational change so much better here, right? Just look, it's real structure. And so I'm not going to ask you much questions, especially to write mechanism and all that, but this is your homework. It utilizes two histidine residues, a general acid-base catalysis to actually convert acetyl coenzyme A to taking acetyl coenzyme A and oxaloacetate to citrate molecule, and that's what is shown here. It's very standard mechanism, but you should look at it. The second reaction is you take citrate and you basically remove a water molecule and then add water molecule to generate isocitrate. Essentially, what you are doing is you are taking citrate molecule and you are switching the position of these two groups, hydroxyl group and that hydrogen from those two carbons, right? They're switching the position. But by switching the position, you are able to generate a secondary alcohol, right, on that carbon. So what will be happening here? Very simple. Think about it. Imagine you have a general base. This enzyme is, as I said, works by a very, very different mechanism. It's, it's an iron sulfur center. I don't want to go through the actual mechanism of aconitase. But formally speaking, in terms of organic chemistry, if you were to see, all you have to do is pick up that proton, right? let's say using, hypothetically speaking, using a general base, and then you form a double bond between that carbon and carbon, and then you remove that hydroxide group OH minus with the help of a general acid, let's say anything, an aspartate molecule or a protonated histidine molecule can act as a general acid and allow that very poor hydroxyl group, poor leaving group, hydroxyl group, to leave with the help of general acid assistance. And so you'll be able to generate water molecule and you'll be able to form the double bond. That's not how it happens, but just for you to know, where are the electrons here. So once you have the double bond, right, enzyme will catalyze the next reaction very stereospecifically, where it will add the water molecule on one particular carbon from one particular side. And so that's what happens when you generate this isocitrate molecule. Reaction 3 is oxidation of isocitrate to alpha ketoglutarate, right, catalyzed by isocitrate dehydrogenase. Isocitrate dehydrogenase is an enzyme that actually utilizes NADP+. It's the only enzyme, actually, mammalian enzyme, that can use both NAD+ and NADP+. And we'll talk about that, I think, later on, I guess. But anyway, either way, you take the NAD+, for example, and it utilizes a manganese +2 in the active site. And it forms this very interesting intermediate called oxalosuccinate. You will not see this intermediate a lot in metabolism, but this intermediate does form in the reaction of isocitrate dehydrogenase. So what is happening, just in the terms of electron pushing, right? You basically take NAD+ and you do the hydride transfer to that. So let's say you pick up a proton from that hydroxyl group, you form the double bond between that carbon and oxygen, and when you do that, that carbon becomes, that hydrogen shown here in the pink on the right hand side must leave, but when it leaves, it will leave as a hydride ion, H-, right, 2 electrons on the hydrogen atom. And that hydride ion is the one that actually gets accepted by NAD+ or NADP+, right? So you have generated that oxalosuccinate intermediate that is shown here in the left-hand side. You see, there's a ketone there on that carbon now. That ketone now, once it forms not hydrogen binding interaction, obviously, but this is an electrostatic interactions with a manganese +2. Manganese +2 is positively charged metal ion. It will suck electron density, right, and stabilize it. So you can see the arrows going. So how does it help in chemistry? It helps in chemistry because you have to get rid of that carbon as a carbon dioxide in that blue, right, shade. So how does that happen? That will happen if that carbon-carbon bond is weak. How is that carbon-carbon bond weak? It is a weak bond because if you push that electron to get rid of carbon dioxide, so you'll have to break that carbon-carbon bond, and therefore you form a carbon-carbon double bond here, and that carbon-oxygen double bond becomes O-. That's how they have pushed the arrows. You can see. Again, please write it down, how electrons are moving here. If you want to really understand this, don't stare at it. But anyway, you generate this enzyme, and that carbon ion will be stabilized, right, by the manganese +2. That's why the arrows are pushed in that direction. That's what it says here. Decarboxylation is facilitated by electron withdrawal by bound manganese +2. Once you have decarboxylate, then it actually goes back and picks up a proton from the other side to generate this alpha ketoglutarate molecule. Again, I'm showing you glutaric acid molecule. Once you memorize glutaric acid, it is very easy to memorize the structure of alpha ketoglutarate. Okay, so that enol intermediate basically gets, regenerates alpha ketoglutarate by picking up proton. As I said, citrate is a symmetric molecule that actually reacts asymmetrically. How do you know? Well, you can do labeling studies, okay, and then you can know. Okay, how do you do labeling studies? Let's say you want to track where that carbon ends up from your labeled acetate. Okay, so they are just showing you labeled acetate, right? If you took that carbon in pink is labeled with, let's say, carbon 14 isotope, red one, you're trying to track where the carbons end up, right? If citrate is able to, although it is a symmetrical molecule, does it react asymmetrically? So you take that and mix it with oxaloacetate, you should be able to get labeled citrate, right? Labeled citrate is shown here. Again, there is a plane of symmetry there, right? But this is a prochiral molecule. Why? Because you can see that CH2COO minus and CH2COO minus with the labeled, if they were identical, they were not reacting asymmetrically, rather they were reacting symmetrically, right? Then you'll form two products, right? Two types of isocitrate you'll form. One where you'll see that labeled carbon is at this position as shown here in the top, and the other one where the labeled carbon is at the bottom as shown here, right? So you'll form isocitrate molecule, but your labels will be at different places. And if this isocitrate was taken up by the next enzyme, right, isocitrate dehydrogenase, then you'll form alpha ketoglutarate, one that will look like the one that is shown here at the bottom, where the labeled carbon will be shown here on that carbon, and the one that actually that coming from the top will have isocitrate glutarate alpha ketoglutarate molecule, where the labeled carbon will be here at the gamma and the carboxy attached to that gamma carbon, right? So you will, if this molecule was reacting symmetrically, then you will have both of these molecules, and therefore you should have both of these products where you have labeled on alpha carbon as well as you have labeled on gamma carbon. But that's not what you see. You only see the product that you forms on the top. You always see the label in gamma carbon, suggesting that citrate is reacting asymmetrically. This molecule is able to bind and only do chemistry at a particular carbon in an asymmetric fashion. By the way, it's not 3-carboxylate group. This alpha ketoglutarate structure is wrong here in the text. I'm not sure if they have corrected it, but just be careful. There will be no carboxylate here. The structure will be identical to the one that is shown here. On the top, just the label will be different. I hope they have corrected that in the next version. Okay, cool, right? So again, you can say, all right, I understood. If you have a prochiral molecule, because prochiral molecule is going to bind to a chiral enzyme molecules, I can see why it will react asymmetrically. And that's what I'm trying to show you here. Okay, when a prochiral molecule, look here on the right hand side, you see carbon molecule with 2 Z group. Those Z groups are identical. What are those 2 Z group representing? Those Z groups are representing the CH2COO minus group of the citrate. But because the citrate molecule goes and binds, and interacts with specific groups on a chiral enzyme, the chemistry happens at only one Z group, not the other one. Okay, I know I'm overkilling myself on this to you, but just wanted to make it a little more clearer. Okay, what is reaction number 4 then? Reaction number 4 is where you take alpha ketoglutarate and you use the 4th enzyme, right, alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase, and you make succinyl coenzyme A. So obviously you are activating a carboxylic acid. So you can see coenzyme A is one of the substrate, and you also decarboxylating oxidatively. So you are using NAD+, right? So you can see the reaction. Like pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex is also a multi-enzyme complex, just like just like PDH. So alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase is also multimeric enzyme that utilizes the same 5 different coenzymes like PDH. Fifth reaction, you take succinyl coenzyme A, you use a GTP, reversible reaction using succinyl-CoA synthetase. You are making a substrate level phosphorylation, you're making a GTP molecule, energy rich molecule, conserving energy from the molecule, right? And you generate succinate, which is a symmetrical molecule. At this point, they have stopped labeling the pink carbon, right? Because citrate is a completely symmetrical molecule. So you take sixth reaction, you take succinate and you basically utilize FAD and oxidize it in a stereoselective manner. Okay, most biochemical reactions catalyzed by enzymes are stereoselective, remember. So I'm just trying to emphasize to you. So succinate dehydrogenase will utilize FAD and basically do a 2-electron reduction to generate fumarate molecule. Write down the structure of fumarate so you can recognize it. Fumarate is again a 4-carbon dicarboxylic acid where the carboxylic acids are on the opposite end. Okay, it's a trans carboxylic acid. Delta G is near 0. It's a reversible reaction. Okay, fine. But something to do with enzymology, right? Enzyme inhibition, enzymes, substrates. It turns out that somehow if you snuck myelonate molecule, okay, in mitochondria, let's say you had this magical syringe that you took some myelonate from the lab and you were able to inject that myelonate into the mitochondria. You know what will happen? There will be no citric acid cycle in mitochondria as long as myelonate is present. Why? It turns out that myelonate is a competitive inhibitor, reversible competitive inhibitor of succinate dehydrogenase. Okay. Okay. Succinate dehydrogenase is the enzyme that takes succinate and generates fumarate for you. So succinate dehydrogenase will go and bind myelonate. Why? Because all you have to do is look at their structure. This enzyme has not evolved perfectly. Somehow it is maybe still undergoing evolution because myelonate structure mimics the substrate structure, succinate, 2-carboxylic group, very similar charge density. Only difference is it's 1 carbon short, but it still retains some of the affinity of succinate. So it basically competes for the same binding site where succinate will go and bind. And therefore, it will affect the Km value, but not the Vmax value. It will be a competitive inhibitor, right? Cool, right? All right, 7th reaction. Then hydration of fumarate to myelate. So you take fumarate molecule and you use the enzyme fumarase. If you recall, what does it do? You basically add water molecule stereoselectively on 1 carbon. And so that's what fumarase does. It basically takes a water molecule, activates it to form hydroxide anion, and hydroxide anion will attack 1 carbon from one side to generate this L-myelate derivative. Okay, so you can imagine, you can just write the reaction in one step. You can attack 1 carbon to form bond with hydroxide group, and you pick up the proton from the 2nd carbon, right? So that's what is shown here, and it does it in stereochemical fashion. Okay, addition of water is in stereochemical configuration, controlled manner. So you only generate L-myelate, not D-myelate. Okay, so fumarase also, it turns out, is highly stereospecific. Not surprisingly, because if you actually added myleate, where the carboxylic groups are on the same side, oh, you will not be able to generate a myelate derivative. Nope, no. It has to have fumarate molecule, not maleate molecule. Cis carboxylic acid, dicarboxylic acid will not do it. And if you try to feed this enzyme demylate and hope that it will produce fumarate for you, because remember, this enzyme can do reversible reaction. Nope, that's not going to happen either. It will not bind demylate or maleate. So it is very highly stereospecific. Not surprising, but just so you appreciate that a little more. And the final reaction is when you take L-mylate and utilize again NAD plus to generate NADH and regenerate your oxaloacetate molecule with the help of mylate dehydrogenase enzyme. Okay. Now, if you think about it, and I want to give you a little bit, food for thought here. Some of these enzymes that you're looking today, you may have seen them earlier in earlier classes. Okay. For example, in one of the gluconeogenesis reaction, like whether you have lactate for generating glucose or whether you have pyruvate for generating glucose in gluconeogenesis reaction. Go back and look. This is what I tell my students always, to connect the dots. If you want to understand biochemistry, you always have to see, oh, I seen this enzyme. It has to click to you. Okay. And I know it's not that easy. You have a lot of new things to learn, but I'm giving you a hint so you can always connect the dots. Okay. Anyway, so you generate oxaloacetate, right? So that reaction, standard free energy, you can see highly endergonic, but under cellular condition, it is near equilibrium reaction. So it happens. Okay, so let's summarize it one more time. What happens in one turn of the citric acid cycle, right? It's shown here. You bring a molecule of acetyl coenzyme A, which is a 2-carbon molecule. Okay, formally speaking, that molecule acetyl coenzyme A has many carbons. But remember, coenzyme A gets regenerated. Okay, so we're not counting. We are only counting the carbons that are in acetate, because it's a metabolism of acetate, right? You bring acetyl coenzyme A, you do the reaction, citrate, isocitrate, third reaction to alpha ketoglutarate, get rid of 1 carbon as carbon dioxide. You generate an energy-rich molecule with red arrows, NADH. You take alpha ketoglutarate, do 4th reaction, again oxidative decarboxylation reaction. You decarboxylate a carbon. You generate activated succinate, which is succinyl coenzyme A, right? Succinyl CoA synthetase will take that, use GDP or GTP, and they are showing you basically product here. So it will generate GTP or ATP and succinate, right? Succinate to fumarate to mylate to oxaloacetate. This reaction sequence you will see a lot in biochemistry, reversible reactions. Okay, succinate gets converted to fumarate, succinate dehydrogenase, fumarate to mylate, right? And mylate to oxaloacetate. So fumarase and mylate dehydrogenase, right? Those are the reaction. You regenerate oxaloacetate, but look, 3 molecules of NADH, 1 molecule of FADH2, and 1 molecule of GTP you produced. And you remove 2 carbon as carbon dioxides. So you brought in 2 carbon and you exited with 2 carbon as carbon dioxide. Cool, right? Pretty cool how the thing reaction happens, is it not? Just to note here that some of the reactions shown here are shown as a one side arrow, but many of those reactions are reversible. Remember, only reaction 1, 3, and 4 are irreversible. So at the end, what do we learn? Here is what we learn, big picture. Big picture is that if you started out with one glucose molecule and you took that glucose molecule through glycolysis, through pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, through citric acid cycle, right? And then eventually through stage 3, which is production of ATP, taking those reduced electron carriers such as NADH, FADH2, FMNH2, etc., and basically transfer those electrons to respiratory chain and utilize those energy in the form of proton gradients to generate ATP. One glucose molecule will make about between 30 to 32 ATP molecule net. How? That's what is shown here in this table. And that gives you a lot of cool ideas. Okay. It turns out that scientists have done experiments and proved that if you have NADH molecule, production of one NADH molecule, on an average, it produces 2.5 molecules of ATP. On the other hand, if you have one molecule of FADH2, it only produces on an average 1.5 molecules of ATP. This is all the calculations based on experiments. Okay, and you should know that. So those are the reactions that are showing you here, all the reaction of glucose all the way. So what you generate, right? The energy in the form of ATP are those reduced electron carriers. And now you know, I am telling you right now that NADH, each NADH will produce 2.5 molecules of ATP, and FADH2 will produce 1.5 molecules of ATP. You can actually calculate how many numbers of ATP molecule will form at the end of the day. Glucose, when you take glucose and make glucose 6-phosphate, it's a priming reaction. You consume one ATP molecule. That's why they have given you a number -1 here. Fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 1,6-phosphate, second priming reaction, you consume one. That's why -1. 2 molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate you produce from each glucose molecule. And if you generate that to 2 molecules of 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, you will end up generating 2 molecules of NADH. Each of that will produce 2.5 molecules of ATP. So therefore, number 5. Don't worry about 3 here. It's a little complicated, but on an average, that's what you'll give, 5. Then you take 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. When you do that reaction to generate 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate, you'll basically generate 2 molecules of ATP. These are the reactions of glycolysis. So they're adding you 2. You take 2 molecules of pyruvate, make 2-acetyl coenzyme A through pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. You'll be generating 2 NADH molecule. That will give you 5 molecules of ATP. And you sum them up, that's the number you get, 30 or 32. And if you look at the side note here, if you're really bothering you why 5 or 3, they tell you that depending on the mechanism used to shuttle NADH equivalents from cytosol to mitochondria matrix, you will either produce 3 or 5 ATP molecules. So there is something about shuttling NADH from cytosol to mitochondria. And we talked about this. We talked about this when we were talking about gluconeogenesis. We talked about it, how you generate phosphoenol pyruvate from pyruvate or lactate molecule. What is the status of NADH concentration in the cytosol versus mitochondrial matrix? Remember? So that's why numbers are different, and we'll talk about some of those shuttle mechanisms towards the end of the class. Okay, so that actually concludes the chapter, first part of the citric acid cycle. And I have given you some extra readings just in case you are interested in some of these mechanisms, right? But nothing to worry for now. You may not have actually few of these slides. All right, so let me stop here and stop recording here.